All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling the evolution of Hinduism.
Sounds like a fascinating journey.
It is, and we've got some great excerpts from Evolution of Hinduism, from ancient civilizations to modern-day wonders to guide us. Just skimming through it, I'm already amazed by how Hinduism has adapted and thrived for thousands of years.
Absolutely. It's a tradition with incredible depth and resilience.
For sure. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind all the way back, way back to the Indus Valley civilization. I mean, talk about ancient history.
We're talking 3300 to 1300 BCE. It's mind-boggling how long ago that was.
I know, right? But here's the thing, even back then, they had these incredibly sophisticated cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, planned streets, complex drainage systems. It makes you wonder what they could have accomplished if they'd had, modern technology.
They were truly ahead of their time. And it's not just the urban planning that's impressive. It's what those cities reveal about their beliefs and practices, those early hints of what might later evolve into Hinduism.
It's like we're catching glimpses of the very first seeds of this incredibly rich tradition, right?
Exactly. And those seeds are definitely there. Take the Pashupati seal, for instance. It's one of those archaeological finds that really sparks the imagination.
Oh yeah, that one's fascinating. It depicts a figure, often interpreted as being in a yoga pose, surrounded by animals. Some scholars even suggest it could be a proto-Shiva.
It's a compelling theory, especially when you consider Shiva's connection to yoga, nature, and those powerful forces of creation and destruction. It's like seeing those early connections.
It is. And it's not just Shiva. We also see evidence of a deep reverence for the feminine divine. There are all these terracotta figurines of a mother goddess.
It's a theme that runs throughout Hinduism, with the worship of goddesses like Shakti or Devi. The feminine principle is so deeply woven into the fabric of this tradition.
Absolutely. And speaking of connections, their reverence for water is pretty striking too. Those elaborate bath structures they built, like the Great Bath in Mohenjo-daro. I mean, it's huge. It makes you wonder if those practices somehow paved the way for the sacred role that rivers, especially the Ganges, play in Hinduism today.
It's certainly possible. Those early practices with water, the ideas of purification and that reverence for nature, it all seems to foreshadow later Hindu beliefs and rituals.
It's amazing how these threads from such an ancient civilization might still be woven into the tapestry of Hinduism today, but then of course things start to shift. The Indus Valley civilization fades, and we enter the Vedic Age, roughly 1500 to 500 CE.
Exactly. This period marks a significant turning point. It's when we see the arrival of the Indo-Aryans. Now, there's debate about how they interacted with existing populations, but it's clear that this period gave birth to the Vedas.
The Vedas, those are the foundational texts of Hinduism, right?
They are. It's incredible to think that these texts were originally passed down orally, through chanting, for generations. The effort involved in preserving that knowledge is just awe-inspiring.
I know, it's mind-boggling. Talk about commitment to your beliefs. And the Vedas, they introduced some pretty monumental ideas, concepts that would shape Hinduism for centuries to come.
They do. We see an emphasis on rituals and sacrifices aimed at honoring powerful nature gods, like Agni, the god of fire, Indra, associated with storms and war, and Surya, the sun god. These deities represented forces that were vital for their survival.
Makes sense. Back then, nature was everything. They depended on the rains, the sun, the fire for their very existence.
Exactly. Their lives were so intertwined with the natural world, and those deities embodied those powerful forces.
But it's not just about the gods. The Vedic period is also where we see those core philosophical concepts starting to emerge.
Oh, right, like dharma, karma, samsara, and moksha. Those are huge. I mean, those ideas are still central to Hinduism today. They're like the foundational building blocks of the entire tradition. You've got it. Dharma, that sense of righteous duty. Karma, the law of action and consequence. Samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And moksha, the ultimate liberation from that cycle.
It's like they were laying the groundwork for an entire worldview, a way of understanding ourselves and our place in the universe.
They were. And those ideas would continue to evolve and be explored in new ways as Hinduism developed over the centuries.
So we've got the stage set, the Indus Valley civilization, with its intriguing hints at what's to come, then the Vedic Age, where those core concepts take root and those powerful nature gods hold sway.
And that's just the beginning. We're about to see how Hinduism takes those foundational elements and weaves them into something even more profound and multifaceted. Now, as we move into the next phase, things start to shift a bit. We see a move away from that outward focus on rituals and sacrifices.
Okay, interesting. So what's happening? What's taking center stage now?
It's a period of deep introspection, a turning inward to explore the nature of the self and the universe. Big questions start to emerge.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, think about it. Who are we? What is this reality we experience? What happens after death? These are questions that have captivated thinkers for millennia.
Those are some pretty deep questions. So how are they tackling those big existential mysteries?
This is where the Upanishads come in. These philosophical texts, they really dive deep into those profound questions.
The Upanishads. I've heard of them, but to be honest, I've always found them a little intimidating. They seem so complex and philosophical.
I get it. They can be pretty dense, but they're also incredibly rich and insightful, and they're full of stories and dialogues that bring those abstract ideas to life.
Okay, that makes them a little less intimidating. So, what are some of the key ideas we encounter in the Upanishads?
Well, for starters, we're introduced to the concepts of Brahman and Atman.
Brahman and Atman. Those sound familiar, but remind me, what do those terms refer to?
Brahman is the ultimate reality, the universal consciousness that permeates everything. It's like the ground of being, the source from which all things arise.
Okay, so Brahman is like the big picture, the cosmic everything.
You got it. And Atman is the individual soul or self. It's that spark of consciousness that resides within each of us.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, Brahman is like this vast cosmic ocean, and each of us with our individual souls, our Atmans, are like drops of water in that ocean.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And the central teaching of the Upanishads is that ultimately Atman and Brahman are one, not separate. This realization, it's said to be the key to moksha, that liberation from the cycle of birth and death we talked about earlier.
Wow, so it's about realizing that we're not just these isolated individuals, but rather we're all interconnected, all part of this vast unified consciousness.
Exactly. And that realization can be incredibly liberating. It frees us from the illusion of separateness and helps us to connect with something much larger than ourselves, something eternal and infinite.
It's a powerful idea, and it definitely marks a shift from the earlier focus on pleasing those powerful nature gods.
It does. It's a shift towards a more internalized, contemplative spirituality. It's about exploring the depths of our own being and recognizing our connection to the divine within.
And it's not just the Upanishads that are exploring these ideas. We also have those epic narratives, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, that are captivating people's imaginations. Those are stories that have been told and retold for centuries.
They have. They're like these grand tapestries woven with tales of adventure, love, betrayal, war, wisdom, and of course, spiritual teachings. They're stories that resonate on so many levels.
The Ramayana, with Prince Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana, it's a story that's so deeply ingrained in Indian culture. I remember hearing those stories as a child, and they still have this power to transport you to another world.
It's a story that speaks to something timeless within us. Those themes of righteousness, duty, loyalty, and courage, they transcend time and culture. They're about those universal human values that we all grapple with.
And then there's the Mahabharata, often called the world's longest epic. It's a sprawling tale with so many characters and subplots, it can be hard to keep track of it all.
It's true, but at its heart, it's a story about this conflict between two sets of cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, leading to an epic war. But woven within that conflict are all these profound philosophical and spiritual teachings.
And of course, we can't talk about the Mahabharata without mentioning the Bhagwat Gita. It's like a jewel within that epic, a text that's inspired people for centuries. It's that conversation between Arjuna, the warrior, and Krishna, his charioteer, who also happens to be an avatar of Vishnu.
Right. It's this incredible dialogue that unfolds on the battlefield just as the war is about to begin. Arjuna is filled with doubt and despair, and Krishna offers him guidance on dharma, karma, bhakti, and jnana.
It's like a crash course in Hindu philosophy, but it's not presented in this dry academic way. It's this dynamic conversation full of emotion and wisdom that speaks to the challenges we all face in life.
It's a text that offers guidance on how to live ethically, how to find meaning and purpose, and how to ultimately connect with the divine. It's no wonder it's resonated with people across cultures and throughout history.
So with the Upanishads, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata, Hinduism is really offering a multifaceted approach to spirituality. You've got those deep philosophical inquiries, those captivating narratives, and those profound teachings on how to live a meaningful life.
It's a rich tapestry, that's for sure. But the story doesn't end there. This period also sees the rise of what's known as the Shramana movement.
Shramana movement? Tell me more about that.
Well, Shramana refers to those who are striving for spiritual liberation. And this movement included traditions like Buddhism and Jainism, which arose around the same time as those later Upanishads.
Oh, interesting. So you have these new spiritual movements emerging alongside Hinduism. How did that impact Hinduism's development?
It actually led to some pretty significant shifts. The Shramana traditions, they challenged some of the existing norms within Hinduism. They questioned certain Vedic rituals and the caste system, and they offered alternative paths to liberation.
So they were kind of shaking things up, introducing new ideas, and challenging the status quo.
Exactly. Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and Mahavira's emphasis on ahimsa, nonviolence, they really resonated with people. And these movements, they gained a lot of followers.
It sounds like this was a pretty pivotal time, with these new spiritual ideas circulating and gaining traction. How did Hinduism respond to this challenge? Did it lead to conflict and division?
Well, here's where you really see the remarkable adaptability of Hinduism. Instead of being threatened by these new movements, Hinduism actually absorbed and integrated integrated many of their ideas.
Really? So rather than creating these rigid boundaries and battling it out, Hinduism was more open to incorporating those new perspectives.
That's right. It's a testament to the tradition's capacity for growth and evolution. For example, the concept of ahimsa, nonviolence, which was so central to Jainism and also emphasized in Buddhism, eventually became a core tenet within Hinduism. Centuries later, it would play a crucial role in Gandhi's movement for India's independence.
That's incredible. So those challenges, those new ideas coming from the Shramana traditions, they actually ended up enriching and expanding Hinduism.
Yes, precisely. It shows that Hinduism wasn't this static, unchanging system. It was, and still is, a dynamic tradition, capable of evolving, integrating new ideas, and finding ways to remain relevant in a changing world.
So we've seen how Hinduism embraced those challenges and integrated those new ideas. It's like this incredible process of growth and evolution that's been happening for centuries. But what happens next? Where does this journey take us from here?
Well, let's shift gears a bit. Imagine you've seen the groundwork laid in the Indus Valley civilization. You've witnessed the emergence of those core concepts in the Vedic Age. You've felt that inward turn with the Upanishads and those epic narratives.
Okay, I'm following you. I'm ready for the next chapter.
Now get ready for Hinduism to really take center stage. It's a time of grand myths, captivating deities, vibrant expressions of devotion.
Okay, this sounds exciting. Paint me a picture. What's happening during this period?
This is what we often call the classical period of Hinduism, spanning roughly from 300 to 1500 CE.
The classical period. Okay, I'm picturing elaborate temples, colorful festivals, maybe even some chariot races.
You're getting close. It's a time when those major deities we know today, Shiva, Vishnu, and Devi, really come to the forefront.
Ah, the divine superstars of Hinduism. They're the ones we often see depicted in art and hear about in stories.
Exactly. Their stories, their myths, become deeply intertwined with people's lives. This is when we see the emergence of the Puranas.
The Puranas, okay, I'm not as familiar with those. Fill me in, what are they all about?
Think of them as Hinduism's grand storybooks. They're filled with tales of the gods and goddesses, creation myths, heroic legends, and philosophical teaching.
Ah, so it's like taking all of that complex philosophy from the Upanishads and those epic narratives and making it more accessible, more relatable for everyday people.
That's a great way to put it. The Puranas, they bring those abstract ideas to life through vivid storytelling. They make those teachings easier to understand, easier to remember.
So instead of just contemplating those big philosophical concepts, people are now hearing these captivating stories about the gods and goddesses, seeing them depicted in art.
Precisely. And those deities, they become more than just abstract principles. They become living presences in people's lives, figures to connect with, to learn from, to seek guidance and inspiration from.
So who are the main players in this divine drama?
Well, you've got Shiva, the cosmic dancer, the destroyer who also makes way for new creation. He's often depicted as an ascetic yogi, deep in meditation, or as this fierce warrior battling demons.
Okay, so Shiva, he's kind of a complex character. He's got this duality to him, both destructive and creative.
Exactly. He represents those forces of transformation that are constantly at play in the universe.
Oh.
And then there's Vishnu, the preserver of the universe.
Vishnu, the preserver, he's all about maintaining cosmic balance, right?
Exactly. And he's known for taking on these avatars, these divine incarnations, whenever the world needs a course correction, like Rama and Krishna.
Oh, right. The heroes of those epic narratives we talked about earlier. So they're not just legendary figures, they're actually avatars of Vishnu, divine beings who descend to earth to restore order.
That's right. And we can't forget about Devi, the great goddess, embodying the divine feminine.
Devi, she's a force to be reckoned with. I mean, she takes on so many forms, each with its own unique powers and attributes. Parvati, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Durga, Kali, the ultimate girl power squad.
It is. She represents the creative energy of the universe, the power of the feminine principle. And her various forms, they embody those different aspects of the divine feminine.
And these deities, they're not just confined to stories and myths. This is also when we see the rise of temple culture. Those incredible structures, those architectural marvels that are still standing today, they were built during this period.
They were. And those temples, they weren't just places of worship. They were spiritual hubs, centers of art, learning, community.
So it's like a blend of a cathedral, a university, a marketplace, a concert hall, all rolled into one.
You got it. Imagine the energy and vibrancy of those temple complexes. You have people from all walks of life coming together, drawn by the stories, the rituals, the music, the art. It's like this tapestry of devotion and community.
And it's not just happening in those grand temples. This is also the period of the Bhakti movement, which is all about that personal connection with the divine, that heartfelt devotion.
Exactly. Bhakti becomes a driving force in Hindu spirituality during this time. It's about cultivating that deep emotional connection with your chosen deity.
And what's so beautiful about the Bhakti movement is that it really really democratizes spirituality. It's no longer just about those elaborate rituals performed by priests.
You're right, it's about that direct, personal relationship with the divine. Saints like the Alvars and the Ninars, they compose these beautiful hymns and poems in regional languages, making those expressions of devotion accessible to everyone, regardless of their social standing or caste.
So it's like these poet saints are creating this pathway for anyone to connect with the divine, to pour their heart out to their chosen god or goddess.
Exactly. And those bhakti poets, they were like rock stars of their time, drawing huge crowds, spreading those messages of love and devotion. They really helped to reshape Hinduism, emphasizing that personal, emotional connection with the divine.
It's amazing to see how Hinduism continues to evolve, from those ancient rituals to those profound philosophical inquiries to this outpouring of devotion through the bhakti movement. But as you said earlier, history rarely moves in a straight line. I'm sure there are some twists and turns ahead as we move into the medieval era.
You're right about that. The medieval period, roughly from 800 to 1700 CE, brings new challenges and new transformations. It's a time of philosophical crystallization, the rise of powerful sects, and significant interactions with Islamic rule.
Okay, I'm ready for the next act. Set the stage for me. What's happening in the medieval period?
Think of it as a kind of renaissance within Hinduism, this flowering of thought and creativity. We see brilliant thinkers like Adi Shankaracharya working to unify various philosophical schools under Advaita Vedanta.
Adi Shankaracharya, he's like Hinduism's grand synthesizer, right?
Exactly.
Bringing together those diverse threads of thought, emphasizing that ultimate oneness of reality.
Exactly. And at the same time, sectarian movements like Vaishnavism, devotion to Vishnu, and Shaivism, devotion to Shiva, they gain momentum. Each tradition develops its own unique interpretations, rituals, and philosophical schools, adding even more depth and diversity to the Hindu landscape.
So it's this fascinating interplay of unity and diversity. You have these unifying figures like Shankaracharya, but you also have these distinct sectarian movements with their own unique flavors.
It is. It's like a vibrant ecosystem where different species thrive while still being part of a larger interconnected web.
I like that analogy. And amidst all of this, you have these incredible poet saints like Kabir and Mirabai who are using their words to bridge social divides. Their devotional poetry, it speaks directly to the heart, emphasizing the universality of divine love.
They were powerful voices, challenging those rigid social hierarchies, reminding people that spirituality transcends those divisions.
It's a message that still resonates today, especially in a world that can feel so fragmented and divided.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the impact of Islamic rule during this period. It's a complex time, marked by both conflict and cultural fusion. You have tensions arising from religious differences, but you also have an exchange of ideas, art, and language.
So once again, Hinduism is navigating a changing landscape, finding ways to adapt and evolve.
And then, as we enter the colonial period, things take another dramatic turn. The arrival of the British introduces a whole new set of dynamics and challenges.
I can only imagine. The colonial era, it was a tumultuous time for so many cultures around the world. How did it impact Hinduism?
Well, on the one hand, you have British authorities scrutinizing and often criticizing Hindu customs, labeling certain practices as backward or superstitious. This sparks these reform movements within Hinduism, aimed at eradicating those practices while also preserving what they see as the essence of Hindu spirituality.
So it's like walking a tightrope. They're trying to modernize to respond to those critiques, but they're also trying to hold on to their traditions, their cultural identity.
Precisely. And you have key figures emerging during this time like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. They were instrumental in advocating for social change.
Raja Ram Mohan Roy, he was a strong advocate for the abolition of sati, wasn't he? That practice of widow burning, it was such a horrific custom.
He was. And he, along with reformers like Vidyasagar, worked tirelessly to improve the status of women and to promote education. They saw education as key to empowering people and challenging those outdated social norms.
It's incredible to think of the courage it must have taken to challenge those deeply ingrained practices, to push for change in the face of such resistance.
It was a time of great upheaval, but also a time of great awakening. And amidst all of this, you have figures like Swami Vivekananda emerging, presenting Hinduism as this universal philosophy capable of addressing the concerns of the modern world.
Swami Vivekananda, he's the one who traveled to the West sharing those teachings on yoga and Vedanta, right?
He did. He became a bridge builder between East and West, helping to introduce Hindu ideas to a global audience.
It's like Hinduism is stepping onto the world stage, starting to engage in that global dialogue. And then, of course, there's India's independence in 1947. That must have been a pivotal moment for Hinduism, as it was for India as a whole.
Absolutely. Independence brought a whole new set of opportunities and challenges. India was seeking to define itself as a secular democratic nation. And the Indian Constitution, it enshrines secularism, guaranteeing freedom of religion while also creating this space for social reforms.
So finding that balance between tradition and modernity, between religious freedom and social progress, that's an ongoing process.
It is. And during this post-independence period, we see the rise of spiritual gurus with global reach, like Sai Baba, Osho, Sri Ravi Shankar, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. They're popularizing yoga, meditation, and Vedantic teachings worldwide.
So those ancient practices, they're finding new audiences, new contexts in the modern world.
They are. And Hinduism is also engaging with those contemporary challenges, addressing misconceptions and stereotypes, grappling with questions of identity, and navigating the complexities of a rapidly changing world.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring the evolution of Hinduism from those ancient roots to its modern expressions. It really shows the enduring power of spirituality, that human need to connect with something greater than ourselves, to find meaning and purpose.
It does, and it makes you wonder which aspects of ancient Hindu thought might be most valuable or relevant to our modern society. What wisdom can we draw from this ancient tradition to help us navigate the challenges of our time?
Those are great questions to ponder, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the evolution of Hinduism. It's been a truly enriching exploration.